We are here to discuss how important it is for India to maintain strategic autonomy. And obviously, because of the uncertainties around the world, which seem to have been triggered in part by the unusual presidency of Donald Trump. And India, along with many other countries, is caught in a situation where they don't actually know how the policy will change from one day to the other. So I would like to start with Ambassador Chinoy. Because you have straddled both worlds of diplomacy and now in your role as DG IDSA, could you tell us what strategic autonomy means for India's defense and diplomacy?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. It's a great privilege to be with you all. For me, strategic autonomy really means independence of decision-making. It's very important to keep this in mind, particularly when trade and technology are being weaponized. And you mentioned the T of not just what we would expect, tariffs, but T of Trump as being one of the great disruptors today. In an uncertain world, it's been made more complex. But it's very important to go back to the essence of strategic autonomy. And I'd like to, in fact, cite Gandhiji, because when India achieved independence, Mahatma Gandhi, who obviously was not really part of our firmament when the Cold War began, or when we actually participated in the non-aligned movement beginning 1961, Gandhiji still had some ideas of his own about strategic autonomy. And one of them was that India should, in fact, never enter any kind of military alliance based on imperial interests. India should never try to imitate Western politics. And India must always make sure that it has independence of decision-making on global issues. So Mahatma Gandhi, in fact, had emphasized strategic autonomy even before India achieved independence. I think the biggest act of a demonstration of strategic autonomy came at that moment when India achieved independence. And thereafter, if we try to look at the history of our strategic autonomy, the first phase was one in which a newly independent India, in fact, led by Nehru, tried to stay away from great power politics. And that was, in fact, also an attempt at strategic autonomy. And Pandit Nehru, for example, wanted to ensure that India played a bigger role on the Asian stage, that India would play an effective role and have agency in the war on the Korean Peninsula, which had unfolded. So therefore, India was loath to take any kind of sides with either the Soviet Union or the Western Bloc led by the United States. But this kind of strategic autonomy came at a price, because the Americans suspected India of being pro-Soviet. The Chinese, led by Mao, in fact, condemned India repeatedly as being a running dog of the imperialists and a lackey of the West. And they, in fact, called our leaders also by similar derogatory terms. And the Soviet Union, in fact, also was affected by the Chinese outlook and the broad dimensions of the Cold War, particularly under Dulles in the late 50s when President Eisenhower was the president of the United States. And then when we look at, for example, the wars that we fought, 1965 war, 1971 war, by then we were a non-aligned country. But it didn't prevent us from trying to engage in issue-based alignment. In 1962, when the Chinese attacked India, India dropped pretenses to strategic autonomy. And Prime Minister Nehru wrote an urgent letter to President Kennedy seeking all kinds of military aid and assistance. In fact, squadrons of fighter aircraft, complete with radars and technical personnel to man these things. During the 65 war, the situation was slightly different, because though there were no formal sanctions against India, India was still denied certain spare parts by both the United States and the UK. 1971, the shoe was on the other foot, because when the United States sent the USS Enterprise into the Bay of Bengal, and there was some kind of coercion underway. India was quick to drop non-alignment momentarily and engaged in some kind of issue-based alignment, which is the currency today, to actually sign a treaty of peace, friendship, and cooperation with the Soviet Union. So we have seen that there is a history to this. If you take a look at the security and defense side, one of the points of inflection clearly was the first war in Kashmir. When the tribals, the Lashkars, fully assisted by the Pakistani regulars, invaded Kashmir, India took the matter to the UN under Article 35 of the UN Charter. In fact, that was aggression against the state of India committed by Pakistan. That was the 1st of January 1948, but within a couple of months, the great powers had actually changed the agenda item to the India-Pakistan question. And thereafter, you had a series of commissions that actually restricted India's strategic autonomy. The UN Commission for India and Pakistan, all sorts of people led it. Frank Graham led it. You had Madeleine Albright's father, Joseph Corbell, who was once the head of UNSIP. There was a plebiscite commission. All sorts of commissions were there. And they restricted the space in which we operated. But today, when we look at strategic autonomy, we have to keep in mind that India has done quite well for itself. On the question of the war in Ukraine, for example, we've maintained neutrality, broad neutrality, urging them to resolve matters through peaceful negotiations. We have also tried to remain broadly neutral when it comes to the West Asian problem. We still have good relations with the people of Palestine, and we sympathize with the people of Gaza. At the same time, we have a strategic partnership, as we speak, the Prime Minister is in Israel, very close partnership with Israel. When it comes to Saudi Arabia's problem with Iran, when it comes to any kind of rivalry between two states, US, China, we've always ensured that we steer clear of bloc politics. So we've done very well there, but where we have not done well, or not adequately well in strategic autonomy, is in terms of, I would say, our propulsion systems for our fighter aircraft, for our naval, ships. I'll give one or two examples and stop at that. For example, in fighter aircraft, considering that the Tejas LCA Mark 1, 1A, and Mark 2 will end up having around 270 aircraft over the next few decades, and they'll be in operation for the next 30 to 50 years. And to add to that, AMCA Mark 1 and AMCA Mark 2, we will have another 250 of those aircraft. So we are looking at about 550 aircraft for the next 30 to 50 years, depending essentially on US engines. GE 404 for many of these, and GE 414 for the Tejas Mark 2 and the AMCA Mark 1. Now for AMCA Mark 2, we are trying to engage the French in a new joint venture called SAFHAL. SAFHAL, is for the helicopters, but a new agreement whereby we will try to acquire fighter aircraft with 120 kilonewton thrust, etc. When you look at our INS Vikrant, 75% is indigenous. But when you look at our destroyers, the Kolkata class, or you look at the cruisers and the corvettes, etc., many of the engines still come from Ukraine, if not from Russia. When we look at our tank, for example, the Arjun main battle tank, is a very fine tank, as General would vouch for it. The fact of the matter is that the 1500 horsepower engine is of German origin. Now for the Zoravar tank, which we have created, the small, more agile, lighter battle tank of 25 tons, essentially post-Galvan, for mountainous terrain, it'll require 1,000 horsepower engine, and we are trying to make it here. So propulsion systems in our armed forces, equipment for our armed forces still leaves a lot to be desired, even if we have succeeded in making an aircraft carrier, making the light combat aircraft, making tanks of our own, even ships of our own. And so I think we need to do much more on that.
Thank you for your opening remarks. I will follow up with a question in a bit, and I will also ask Mr. Bhatia about critical technology, which is missing in important parts in Indian defense. But before I move to you, I would like to ask Lieutenant General Hooda this question about India's hard power. So we have Bollywood, we have yoga, we have a lot of soft power. Does India have hard power, and how does it exert it while being a democracy and maintaining strategic autonomy? I mean, can you correlate strategic autonomy directly to military heft?
Yeah, so I think we've had a very good, fascinating background by Ambassador Chinoy. Let me say at the outset, strategic autonomy is a function of power. If we want to practice what we think a path which is in our national interest, we have to resist coercion by great powers. Simply that. And we can only resist this coercion if we ourselves are a powerful enough country. Now, how do you measure power? So there are different ways of measuring power. So you measure economic power, technical power, geography, demography, size of your population, and of course, military power. And I would say to you that the most consequential power in international politics is military power. I'm not suggesting that economic power or wealth is not important. It is important because it's required to build your military capability and military power. But it's military power that, as I said, is the most consequential form of power. And to give you an example, please look at Japan and Germany. At one time, the two most, the number 2 and number 3 economies in the world. Japan was number 2, Germany was number 3 economic. Can we call them great powers? We don't call them great powers. Why? Because they lacked military capability, and because their security was tied to either NATO or to the US. And therefore, if we want in the future for India to be considered as one of the poles, one of the great powers, and our ability to establish strategic autonomy, we need to build our military capability. And that's essential. So where are we as far as our military capability is considered today? So if you look at various international organizations that measure military power, generally you will find India as 3rd or 4th most powerful military in the world. So we are doing well there. What are the strengths of our military? We have a very sort of composite force. All 3 elements, the Army, Navy, Air Force, are capable, are strong. The kind of operational experience that we have in the military, I think very rarely any military in the world has that kind of experience. And experience in the kind of conditions in which we are going to fight. So our experience in high altitude operations, which define our borders, is enormous. We have very strong maritime capability in the Indian Ocean. Now we know Indian Ocean carries 70 to 80% of the world's trade. And here, as of now, the Indian naval power is unmatched as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. And finally, a crucial element of strategic autonomy is the fact that we are a nuclear power. And that therefore, you cannot be, sort of as the Prime Minister said, no nuclear blackmail as far as we are concerned. Nuclear power gives you that enormous effort. But I would suggest to you also that, look, military power is a relative concept. We can't say just because we have so many guns and so many tanks and so many aircraft and so many ships that we are a strong power. Military power is always relative to your adversary. So when you are looking at India's military capability and military power, you have to see it in a condition that what is our and who are our potential adversaries. And here our potential adversary clearly is China, which is a strong economic power, strong technological power, it's a strong military power. And therefore, when we talk about building our capability, it has to be relative to making sure that the gap between India and China in terms of military power does not increase too much. And I will make 4 quick suggestions in this regard. One, and I think he'll be talking about it more, we need to build a strong defense industrial base. Now, I know there is the Atmanirbharta push that is happening and much has been done. But the fact is, in the last 10 years, India has been the largest importer of arms in the world. We are the largest importer of arms in the world, and we cannot continue like this. And therefore, there is a need to build this strong industrial base. And to do that, the second point is that we need to get the private industry coming in more and more. And again, the government has given a push. But if you look at market share of defense public sector undertakings and the private industry, the DPSU's market share still is 80%. I'm not suggesting you don't need companies like HAL or BEL, etc. But I think we need a more sort of balanced ecosystem where the DPSUs concentrate on strategic systems and the private industry, much more innovative, much more nimble, meets the immediate and sort of technological requirements of the army. So we need to balance this. We need to balance this out. We also need to improve our procurement processes and decision making. We've had these incidents of projects going on for 1 decade, 2 decades, on aircraft, on tanks, on submarines. This is unworkable in a system if you want to quickly build our military capability. What we are buying today, the 114 Rafales, the case was initiated in 2001. 25 years later, we are buying it. Our project for AIP submarines is almost 15 years old. Still haven't got it. So I think there is a need to look at procurement processes. My final point is, look, you need to enhance your R&D budget. We want to be a technical power. We are spending 0.65% of our GDP on R&D. Global average is 2%. If we are not going to be able to spend money on R&D, then suddenly we want to become a strong technological power. It is not going to happen. And even the structure of our R&D spending is skewed. So 2/3 of our R&D budget is spent by public sector and only 1/3 by the private industry. It is absolutely the reverse in all other countries. US, China, Europe, Israel, it's the private industry which is spending more on R&D. So I would also appeal to the private sector that, just don't depend on government R&D, but there is a need to do that. And this is even more essential, and my last quick point is, look, technology is going to increasingly define sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Why do we have words today like data colonization, data sovereignty, technological sovereignty? If you are going to be dependent on critical technologies on countries abroad, it is going to seriously constrain your choices. We can say we can make strategic choices, but if you are technologically dependent and some country can tell you that we can cut you off, you just have to see what happened to last year to Nayara Energy when Microsoft decided to cut off access to their data. Why? Because EU had sanctioned Nayara Energy. Now, I know the data was restored after 6 days, which should give us a real sharp wake-up call that if our data is all going to be handled by foreign companies, what will happen is just an example. So I will end here. Thank you.
Okay, so you spoke about critical technologies, and that's something that Mr. Bhatia, I think, would be able to answer, both as an industry veteran and an army veteran. So aero engines, then we need frontline naval vessels, more submarines, destroyers, and corvettes you just mentioned. propulsion systems. I mean, China has Fujian now, and they are building another aircraft carrier. Then we also need more eyes in the skies. We need satellites, we need high altitude and medium altitude drones that are even capable of striking, because we can have space warfare in the future. The question is, you can be from the private sector or the public sector, but if you have to be self-reliant, then there are these critical technologies that India needs to master. We've been talking about it for decades. So what's the holdup? Please explain the challenges that you face on the path towards self-reliance.
A very tall task given to me to explain all this in a short while. But let me say that Ambassador Chinoy actually laid down the foundation for what we talked about, strategic autonomy, and how we are developed over the time of independence since 1947. General Hooda very clearly explained what is hard power. Let me just tell you a bit about where do we stand, what is the market looking at, how do we go forward. So if you take a look today, sir, I think it's not a period of disruption alone. In fact, it was very interestingly that World Economic Forum had to discuss what is the way the world is going about. And the word they coined was polycrisis, which means a series of small crises which are happening. They may be appearing small in nature, but when they are together, they interact with each other, and the overall effect is much bigger than what individual effect would have come. That's what we are seeing in the world today. In this world, I will not go about, what it brings about, but to tackle that, there were three alternatives which were given. The first was that you need to hold a very intense dialogue with all the stakeholders to identify the critical areas of problem. Some of them were mentioned while they were discussing. The second part was that you need a multi-pronged approach, which means you need some short-term measures and you need some long-term measures. And third, and most important, was that it has to be a whole-of-nation approach. All the silos need to be broken down. So if this is the way out of this polycrisis, where do we find ourselves today? Let's take a look at where we are going and where we are headed. I'll not dwell too much upon strategic autonomy. I think enough has been said. Needless to say that it does consist of a financial part, which means how the nation's economy goes about, and second is about the military-industrial complex, which is essential for that. We have seen many countries, he mentioned those who are financially strong. I can quote countries which are technologically self-sufficient, but never had the independence to act on their own. You can see some of these countries in the Europe itself. So India needed both of these. Given that we are going to grow and the so-called the future looks bright for our economy, we'll be by 2047 something like 30 to 40 billion or trillion dollar economy by that time. But how does it play on the defense budgets which are coming up? Today, India spends only, or the defense budget of India is 3% of the global defense spend. It's $2.5 trillion. We spend close to about $80 billion on our defense budget, which will translate to about 3.5 to maybe 4%. If we continue to grow the way we are growing, by 2047, the predictions are that we will be 10 to 16% of the global defense spend, which means that the military-industrial complex, which we are talking about today, has to be 7 to 8 times larger than where it exists itself. Now, this throws a lot of opportunities. A lot of people will get excited about it, but there are many challenges which come in front of you. Now, one of the biggest challenges which will come is, I think India has got the wherewithal and the manufacturing competence to handle this. But where the biggest challenge will come is on two parts. One is on the skill sets which are required, which do not exist today in the country to that level. And second is which is extremely important, that how well do we develop our technology. As early as, I think, 60 years ago, Vikram Sarabhai had mentioned that if India has to find its rightful place in the comity of nations, we cannot be second to none in application of advanced technologies. And where do we sit on advanced technology? There's a big void which comes up, especially in critical areas. So how do we go about developing these critical technologies in the country? If you take a look at technology, it can be divided into about 3 parts. Research and development will remain a state function, innovation, which is incremental R&D being done, and last is the breakthrough or disruptive technologies. I think we need to put a thrust into that segment to ensure that we can jump the queue and overtake these voids in the quickest possible time. Let me just give you, I think we should leave 10, 12 minutes for questions to go, and I can see the clock. But I was wanting to share some data with you, which is very interesting. We talk about Israel as the startup nation of the world. They have a population which is less than Bangalore and have about 10,000 startups. Do we know that Bangalore itself has 16,000 startups and their density is more than Israel? So it is not that there is a shortage of talent. It is not that there is a shortage of entrepreneurs in this country or the innovators in this country. All we need is a small push, what we call creating the right kind of sentiment in the market, or what we call the ecosystem in larger financial terms. If you take a look at what happened in IDEX, a very small scheme, some 500 odd crores spent, and suddenly you found that there are 9,000 registered startups in area of defense. 1,300 of them have either received or are in the process of receiving an order. But critical to all this and critical to the development is the R&D spend, which was mentioned. Today, our defense R&D spend is 5.1% of our defense budget. Every country which is anywhere on the top in so-called the military power or otherwise spends anything between 10 to 15% of our R&D. So we really need to put it up. The second question which will invariably come, why is that private industry is not spending so much of money? I did hear a word about it. Let me just tell you that our system of classification of R&D is so outdated that whatever R&D I do for the purpose of selling a product does not qualify for R&D. So if I spend 1,000 crores on developing guns, and we are the largest producer of artillery guns in the world today, that is not qualified as R&D in Indian terminology. So firstly, we need to take a look at that. Secondly, there were very small incentives which were available. They have all been withdrawn for the last 5, 6 years. They are no longer available. The spend on R&D used to be doubled, by which you could save about 20% on income tax on the R&D spend. That has also been taken away. We need to create that kind of ecosystem, and I am sure people are, as it is, Indian manufacturing sector has not been spending much money on R&D. We know it's about 0.6%, and at least it should reach 1.5%, if nothing more. It hasn't happened. I will try and finish my argument by just saying that we need to look into the front. We need to unshackle innovation in the country, which means we have to learn how to handle failures. If you are going to take technologically challenging projects, 80% of them are going to fail. Today, our system does not allow for any failure to be credited. How will you do deep R&D if you are not going to do that? The second part is, 2 years ago, our budget announced 1 lakh crore for deep technology fund. We make excellent policies. I don't think on policy front much can be done. But we need to operationalize these things much faster. I don't think much money has been spent out of that fund till to date. The third part which I'd like to say is, we are all talking about our budgets, our things. I could actually go on forever giving you the data. But the key point here is that we cannot continue to remain an importer, and we have done well with our exports. We need to give a push to our exports. We don't even have a separate desk in Exim Bank for defense exports. There's no line of credit which is separate for defense. It is a general line of credit. All we need is little more focus on it, and you'll find that we can do much better. The point regarding where do we stand, figures were already told. Private industry is about 23% of the total production. But when you take a look at exports, we are 70%. So we are in the process of coming of age, but we need some quick actions. And the last point before I sum up is on acquisition cycle. We need to shorten that drastically. If the acquisition cycle is longer than the developmental cycle, you are actually acquiring outdated equipment. And right now, in terms of technological equipment, communication equipment, equipment on EW is changing within 12 months. You cannot be sitting down and buying something which was developed 7 years ago. It will be outdated. So I think we need to, and I would agree that the work is going on, but I think we need to have strict timelines for that. I'll rest my case there. I think I have spoken enough.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia. I'll come to you, back to you on the question of innovation shortly. I'll do a quick follow-up before we open it for questions. Yes. And you wanted to add something? But
I just wanted to support what General Hooda had said, that, no amount of soft power can be a substitute for hard power. And Theodore Roosevelt had also said that, speak softly but carry a big stick. So you've got to keep your powder dry at all times, even though you are a proponent of peace. And George Kennan, the famous US diplomat, had also said that you have no idea how much it contributes to diplomatic negotiations when you have a quiet military force lurking in the background. So there is obviously a great impact that. In India, we have had a great deal of churn in recent years. Policies have come up. In fact, 75% of procurement now is domestic from the procurement budget. So that should be a boost in the arm for not only DPSUs, but also for the private sector. 25% of the R&D budget of DRDO is meant for the private sector. DRDO is supposed to be creating technologies and also sharing it with the private sector. One example, of course, is the ATAC gun, which Kalyani system is rightly proud of, but some of that has been developed by the DRDO. The point here is that there is no substitute for spending our own money on R&D, because technology doesn't come cheap, and people make you pay through your nose for technology. But the issue here is that what kind of technology do you procure, at what stage of that technology shelf life do you procure that technology? So once you procure technology, you can do all sorts of spiral development and block development for aircraft engines, for example. If you now acquire, for example, the 120 kilonewton technology from the French, you can derate it maybe downwards. You can upgrade it to a higher rating also to power either lesser aircraft or bigger aircraft. So we've got to keep this in mind. For me, the bottom line here is that there is no strategic autonomy worth the name unless you have the freedom of choice during wars, for example. The howitzer shell is a good example. Recently in the Ukraine war, even the European Union ran out of the 155 mm howitzer shell, artillery shell. And we had run out of it during Kargil and had to run helter-skelter then to get the 155 mm ammo for the Bofors gun from South Africa. So we've got to make things of our own. We are doing a lot right now. We've now got exports worth roughly $2.7 billion, roughly worth 24,000 crores. We want to go up to 50,000 crores. But the private sector will also have to put their money where their nose is. And the government on its part will also have to create national champions. This whole business about L1 all the time, or that you cannot give, for example, the ATAG order to one company. It must go to two companies. I don't agree. At the end of the day, I've seen both the ATAGs, yours as well as the one made by Tassel. And after a while, they both are different guns, at least the software side of it. And so let's create national champions. Let's identify areas, niche areas in which certain companies are capable of doing well. Let's not go about L1 all the time. Let's also talk about T1. People who have the technology, their order book should be full, because if they don't have orders, they're not going to be able to put any kind of money. So it's a chicken and eggs situation here. And I think the government is doing a lot today, and we should credit the government for trying to make an effort in the right direction.
Lieutenant General Hooda, one quick follow-up question for you. Our theme of the summit is India future ready, or making India future ready. So are India's armed forces future ready, in terms of AI or technology, like the more advanced technology, not only the conventional critical technology?
So I think we are getting there, Satarupa. Technology adoption in the military, and I'm being completely honest about it, could have been a little faster. So we are looking now at, you see, a lot of people had been talking about unmanned systems and drone technology, etc. But the real push for drones, etc., coming in has only happened in the last sort of year or so, and particularly speeded up after Operation Sindoor. We are talking about artificial intelligence playing a big role, but I think the key is not only the fact that you have the technology, but you have the appropriate structures and strategy for it. So we can't say we'll just adopt AI unless you have organizational structures, say for example for data, etc., which are put in place so that AI can be properly sort of inducted. If you don't have a strategy for how unmanned systems, cyber strategy, for example, is going to be applied, then just getting the technology is suboptimal. So let me just say that I think there's a great realization that we need to get there. Could the technology adoption have been a little faster? The answer is yes.
Quickly, Mr. Bhatia, because I think I have to have a quick round of audience questions, just very quickly. Innovation. We are talking about innovation. Technology is changing very fast. What is in vogue today might not be 2-3 years down the line. How much focus is India's defense industry giving on military innovation, like coming up with products which could be disruptive but also helpful?
There are two phases to technology development. One is development, second is absorption of that technology. Both these phases need to be curtailed. Regarding the focus, I would say that there is a lot of opening. We never used to have a thing called technology roadmap. Now we have got something on technology and TPCR, which tells us that what are the requirements of the services for maybe next 2 decades. But I think much greater interaction has to take place at all levels. Right now, all technology development is still going on in silos. You take a look at universities, they are working in some way. Somewhere you will find startups, they have got their own challenges, including funding and value of death. You will take a look at DRDO, of course they are developing, but they are also spending a lot of money. If you see half the money allocated to DRDO spent on administrative purposes. Total allocation is 26,000 crore. 13,000 crore goes to the projects, and the 12 to 13 goes into the so-called the complex. It cannot be cut out fully, but we need to have much greater focus. What we need is all these silos need to be broken. You need to work as a cohesive team to do innovation, the way some of the countries have done. And that's exactly what the model we need. And I think all the goals are well within reach.
And of course, addressing the bureaucracy as well, which is an old problem.
See, it is very difficult to pinpoint one person and say bureaucracy.
In general.
We are all a problem in our own ways, and together we make it into a complex whole thing. So, of course, everybody would like things to be much faster. Okay. But the fact is, there's bureaucracy in armed forces, there's bureaucracy itself, there is a bureaucracy in industry. Everybody has got that. We need to break that down.
Yeah, got it. And of course, the innovation part of it and more research spending. I mean, these figures are very well known. Thank you very much.